All right. Well, folks, you know you're in for a treat when you hear that tune. So it's time for another week of the RecPoker podcast. This is the forums edition, hanging out every Monday night and talking about poker strategy, talking about hand histories, talking about ways we can get better at the actual fundamental tactics of the game of poker. If you don't know already, my name's Jim Reid. I'm Bluff Storini in the home game and at RecPoker Jim on the hellscape we call Twitter. And I have the best freaking job in the world, hanging out here on Monday nights with the rest of the RECing Crew, our panel of leaders and awesome folks over here at RecPoker, just having the time of our lives. So let me start by introducing our sponsor. We're so grateful for the support from Running Aces, the official sponsor of the RecPoker podcast. They're located less than an hour north of the Twin Cities in the beautiful state of Minnesota. You find out more about them at runaces.com. Most of what we do here is free. We're a largely volunteer-based organization at RecPoker. So we really support, we really depend on the support of our sponsors and our premium members. And if you're listening to this and having a good time, I'd encourage you, get involved in our premium membership. It's only $22 a month, but you can get your first month for only $5 by entering the code RecPoker at checkout. And if $5 is too much, I get it. It's a tough time in the world right now, and we want to support and welcome really poker players from all over the world, poker players from every socioeconomic background. And we don't want price to be a burden or to create friction on people signing up. So if you don't have $5 and you still want to get involved, just make a donation to your local food bank of any amount and send us proof of your donation, and we'll credit you with a free month here at RecPoker. And we'll be offering an opportunity later in the show to give away a prize and help support a local food bank as well. We're doing this forums edition of the show live on YouTube, which we do every once in a while. So we're going to be looking forward to some participation from the audience. And speaking of the audience, you hear my voice a lot around here, but I'm just one person, and it takes a whole gang to make the magic happen here at RecPoker. We call our gang of wizards the Recing Crew. If you want to find out more about me or the rest of the Recing Crew, you can go to rec.poker/crew or just listen up because you're going to meet a few of them here on the show tonight. And then we will dive into the action. Take it away, Chris Jones.
Well, I'm Chris Jones. You can find me 5B5 on Twitter or 5x5 in the PokerStars home game. And I help run our monthly strategy segment called the Deep Dive.
And I'm John Somsky, also known as Poker Geek MN everywhere. And I keep our home game slumping along.
I'm Kim Kilroy, PetVet33 on the social platforms, Fergie56 in the home game. And I run a hand history review for premium members who would like to bring their mostly live hands on the second Wednesday of the month.
It's a lot of fun. Come get involved, folks. So this is the forums edition of the show. We've been really amping up our Discord lately. So we still have the forums at RecPoker, of course, but more and more people are getting involved in the Discord channel. We've got a ton of great places there to share information, to bounce ideas off your buddies, and to get feedback from coaches and mentors about your own play. So go check that out. You can go to rec.poker/Discord to get a link and get more involved there. So we're going to take a look at a hand that interestingly, we actually already looked over in a forum episode just a few weeks ago. It's a hand that Taylor Maas played in the WSOP this summer. And the episode and the hand itself created a lot of good conversation in the forums, on Discord, and even in our YouTube comment section, talking about different ways to approach this spot post-flop particularly. So even though we've kind of talked about the hand and gone through some of this already, Chris Jones thought, I think there's some pretty cool stuff that we can still tease out of here. Let's bring this back on the show. So Chris, take it away. What's on your mind about this one?
And so I think, there was a really great conversation about this hand. Ended up going like 4 or 5 ways. It was a king queen offhand, and there was some compelling conversation in that. I think Kim leading the charge, saying just fold pre. And so I think, and I think really, I think there's a compelling case there, and I don't want to kind of relitigate that. And actually, I'd like to simplify this scenario because the conversation that really interested me was one that I saw that also aligns with something that I keep thinking about on turn play. And that is that when we are out of position on a turn, having had the initiative and then having c-bet and been called, and we have sort of a condensed ranged hand like we did in this hand. So the hand in question was, let's say this was just a heads up sort of scenario where we were in one of the blinds, we three bet somebody who had opened from the hijack, and they called us. And so we are the pre-flop aggressor, but we're out of position. And the flop came King 7 Deuce Rainbow. In the hand in question, we had King Queen, and we elected to c-bet and were called once by the player in position. So, and in the actual hand in question, a bunch of other people folded. But let's just simplify this and say we're in a heads up scenario, and that has happened. And then the turn I think was a 9 in the hand in question. And we can talk about some different scenarios like this. And I don't necessarily want to just focus on King Queen. What I want to focus on is when we're in this scenario, having been the pre-flop aggressor, then having c-bet, maybe a large portion of our range in these kinds of, like, especially where we've taken a 3-bet action. And then now we're heads up, we're out of position, and we've got a hand that maybe we don't want to take 3 streets. Maybe we want to just sort of maybe get more into like realizing our equity mode. But the act of checking here feels like it just absolutely caps our range, or does it? Or does it? And what are the monsters that we are checking on this turn? What kind of value are we checking on this turn? And I think this is a scenario that as I was listening to the conversation, I was thinking about this myself. It's a scenario where I feel like I am playing way too face up and even aware of it in the moment, but I don't know how to escape it. I don't know how to and I'm starting to think about, so for instance, there's this player, Sean Winter, the poker guys have talked about Sean Wintering, which is this idea of betting small on the turn in these cases with a large portion of your range for the simple ability to keep your options open because it uncaps your range. Whereas when you don't bet here, when you check on this turn, you almost always cap yourself at top pair or worse. And so that's the conversation I wanted to have, is sort of like, what do you think and what do you do in these situations? Are you checking strong value, having been the 3-bet aggressor, then c-betting, and you still have strong value? If you have pocket kings or something, are you checking those on the turn? Or how are you protecting your checks? Or are you ever betting hands like, say, pocket queens? If you have pocket queens on this board, are you ever betting those for a second barrel on this turn? And that's the conversation I wanted to have.
So, Chris, I want to just clarify for our audience here. So, are we talking about generally when we're the aggressor and we're out of position, how do we proceed on future streets, or specifically on this exact flop, with the how specific do you want to get?
I felt like this exact flop helped frame it
okay,
but I am more sort of interested in when we've taken this, when we've 3-bet, been called, c-bet, been called, still out of position, and when we check, aren't we just being like, just here you go, take it away from me if you want. If you're good, if you're good enough to read this, you understand, that's, I don't know. That's I think the dilemma for me.
So I want to open this up to the YouTube chatters as well as our panel of RecPoker Crew members here. So there's there's several questions here, I think. But the one that jumps out to me is sort of, we're supposed to be c-betting at a high frequency when we're the 3-better. right? We've got range advantage. We can size down. When we're out of position and they don't fold on the flop, there's always this question in my mind of like, so what street am I going to give up on? Like, I'm not going to go 3 streets with every hand that I 3-bet with, obviously. So you're going to be taking all the hands that you're going to be taking your entire range that gets to the flop. And I guess we're asking our audience sort of, how do you segment that range? What are the hands that you choose to c-bet with? What are the hands that you choose to check with? Are some of those checks check raises? Are they give ups? One question that always comes up in this question is, like, do we need to be balanced against every player that we're encountering in this spot? It's a very large conversation, so I'm glad we're opening up a new episode for it. John Somsky, you unmuted first.
Well, I was going to say you had said, what sizes what should be in our checking, what should be in our betting range, but it's really more along the lines of what do we do when we miss so that we can check and not always give up, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really think that's the question Chris is asking is how do we not make it so that we are just playing our hands face up?
Right. And maybe not missed. It's the hands, like for the hand on a king 7 deuce board, king 7 deuce 9 board, right? Let's just say it's maybe there's a flush draw now, but let's not put, at least it's not 3 of a flush on the board. King 7 deuce 9 on the turn. We've got queens, jacks, 10s. My instinct there is, well, we should check this, right? Or I've got, like, if I 3-bet, I got spicy with king 10 and I got even that kind of hand and I bet it once and I got called, and I feel like what like Play Optimal Poker would say to us is, well, we've got a condensed range in this situation. We shouldn't be bloating a pot with a non-polarized range. So we should be trying to just realize our equity and probably play this through a check call kind of mode. But I ultimately feel against, like, really good players that if you check and call this, they should blow you off of it on the river. Like a good player should. They should just be like, and it's really hard to, what do you do with that part of your range? And do you ever bet here on this turn? Is the answer to check hands like pocket 9s for your set of 9s that you turned on that you got on the turn? Like, do those start to pull into your checking range, or king 9? Do those start to pull into your checking range so that you have something to fight back with against an observant player?
Tim, you unmuted there. What's on your mind?
Well, I mean, specifically hands like top pair, medium kicker. Like thinking we're not talking top. It's not worth 2 streets of value, more than 2 streets of value anyway. We're not going to get 3 streets of value out of this hand. So do we check the flop and go for the turn bet, or if we bet the flop, maybe we check the turn, and now our value is going to come on the river. So our value can come from either betting the river if they check back the turn, or if they didn't check back the turn and we call, now we're just bluff catching with it or something like that. I just think that, like, those kinds of hands are not worth 3 streets of value anyway.
And let's just define for our audience. So when Kim's talks about streets of value, she's basically saying, how many streets can you make a value bet and get called by a worse hand? So it is kind of a narrow target. To get called by a worse hand on 3 streets means that your opponent has to have a worse hand than yours, but not so bad a hand that they're folding to 3 streets. So, you need a pretty strong hand to get called by worse hands, as well as getting called by better hands, I guess is the way to think about it. So the thinner your value, the worse your hand is, the thinner your value is. So one pair hands you might think of as like I'm going to get one street of value. I'm going to get two streets of value. Sets and two pair, or you might get more streets of value. It all depends on the board run out, of course, but that's kind of what we're talking about there.
Yeah. I think hands like queens and maybe jacks too, they don't need a lot of protection on this board. They're either way ahead or way behind. So again, those can fall into the same sort of category. I often will not c-bet those kinds of hands on this kind of flop. I will delay the c-bet because we're out of position, and we generally have a lower c-bet frequency out of position anyway.
Yeah, I tend to agree there. I think that's become part of my adjustment in this strategy is checking more out of position on the flop so that we don't have to because I feel like the c-bet check and then see where you're going is a line that is very easy to attack for a thinking player. And yeah, so that's the but I guess like a hand like King Queen, like the example that was in the hand a few weeks ago in the episode, King 7 deuce rainbow, we see, but we 3-bet it pre-flop, we c-bet it, 9 comes on the turn. Maybe that's probably a hand we probably want to c-bet for a lot of reasons that were discussed in the episode last week. I'm just kind of
as we c-bet small, I think we can just go small again.
That's my question. That's my question.
It doesn't change the board texture all of that much. And if we went like quarter to a third pot on the flop, I think we can do the same on the turn here.
Yeah.
Now we haven't talked about stack depths or any of that stuff and setting up rivers, and it's also stack dependent, but in a vacuum, I think we can go small on a turn that doesn't change the nuts all that much.
And then does that mean that are we going for 3 streets, 3 small streets? Is that the kind of the approach with this? So King 7 deuce 9 3 on the river. Is it just small?
What's our value target? That's what I want to talk about here, because in some boards, I feel like you have to get value on flop and turn because it's very draw heavy, and you're not going to be able to get value on the river from the portion of your opponent's range that would pay for it on the turn before that last card came in. On King 7-2 rainbow, it's not a flush draw. There really aren't any straight draws. So your opponent's calling range is going to be mostly marginally made hands, right? So like ace 7, pocket 10s, king queens, 9, right? Yeah, the queens that didn't 3-bet pre-flop and stuff like that. Or no, you 3-bet, so they just called. So in that case, I think you can get some value on the river from some of those marginal hands. Whereas if this was a much more coordinated board, I'd be arguing much more strongly for flop and turn bets. And then you can decide to give up on the river and check call with your bluff catchers, because more bluffs are available for them too when their draws don't come in. In a spot like this, it does. I do like the.
There's not a lot of draws on the flop. That's the problem.
Right.
So I like charging them, with their king hands that you're beating, with their lower pocket pairs, their 1 pair hands. So how are they going to exploit us in that sense? Are they going to be like what are the mistakes that we're allowing them to force us to make? You know what I mean? Like, if they have a really strong hand, they're going to raise. If they have a medium strength hand that we're beating, that's not like a natural bluff raise for them in this spot. Mm-hmm. Like, they're not going to be thinking, I can get this guy off a king. Mm-hmm. So what are the ways, I guess, so like one way that we're kind of inviting them, I guess, would be they can also kind of slow play their very strong made hands, like set of 7s, but they're not, but if king. We're just making, ace king, if we're making small bets though, like they're not capturing as much in the hand as they should be with those monsters. So what's the downside?
So again, it depends on stack sizes.
Yeah, and Mike Day did mention right as soon as we started talking about this, he's like, okay, well, we need to talk about stack sizes. But like we've got some good comments in the YouTube chat here. But yeah, that's a really good point, Kim. Because you, as the hero, also shouldn't be just making small bets. Like we are kind of still copying our range a bit, I guess, by not trying to capture more value by our own monsters. John Thompson?
Well, I was just going to say, if you're doing 3 streets of small bets, is that any less space up
Right.
than
Well, yeah.
doing the check?
I don't know. Like it depends, right? Like because you can bet that you can include then some of those stronger hands at least on the flop and turn. Probably on the river is where it gets really dicey. Because like if you have a set of kings on this board, I could see betting if and especially if you sort of understand this as a strategy out of position that you want to sort of protect yourself by doing this. But then I think once you get to a river, that gets a little dicey. Like you probably want to capture more value there.
Yeah, because so what we want is we don't want to be totally exploitable.
Right.
So one possibility is that we continue to bet, right? We could just blow all 3 streets, but then we are putting money in that it's unlikely they're going to call, and we're going to be really value owning ourselves because they're going to call with everything that beats us and almost nothing that doesn't. So that's not such a great idea. We can also just start checking a lot more of our strong hands to include in there. And if the person we're up against you think is the type that will almost always see this and try to blow you off by the river, then that would be perfectly acceptable. You do it twice and they're not going to do it anymore because they're going to see that you have accommodated or made that change, and then you can go back to your normal style of play. And or we need to come up with a different way to do the balance. So if we were to do the small bets each 3 times, would there be other things like you'd mentioned? You could put your strong hands in there on the first 2, but you're really going to want to make it bigger on the end, which again lets them play the river perfectly.
Yeah, it does. Right. That's why this is. It's hard to play out of position, right? And so like, but part of the question for me is thinking about. So it is. Let's just it is hard to play out of position, but how do we do our best to not cap ourselves while still maintaining balance? And and balance isn't necessarily an objective in and of itself, but it is an objective so that we're not being exploited, like you said, against a good player. And I think once they see, I can think of a couple of like really good players in the Minnesota area who I've played with recently, who I know did this to me. Like I had hands exactly like this, where I'm out of position against them, and we got to a turn. I checked because I had a condensed range, like a medium strength hand. And then I just faced, the dragon's fire on the river. And, and now I'm stuck in just like the situation you don't want to be stuck in when you're out of position, where it's just like, I don't know what to do right now. So I guess I'm just trying to think about ways to, and I guess maybe it's bet small on the river or on the flop and the turn, and then sort of evaluate on the river.
That sounds hard. That sounds like we have to think a lot.
Out of position is hard.
Yeah. And you can see why, right? And especially when you're dealing with experienced opponents. Like I think this is a real difference between, do you even need to worry about defense in spots like this? And I mean, you do against good players, but a lot of, less experienced players aren't going to be able to take that much advantage of it. Yeah.
And I guess, the other question is, okay, I want you to put yourself in this position. Like, I want to ask about hands like pocket nines, pocket kings, king nine, right? Those hand like you turn to set on the turn, or you turn to set with the nines, you turn to pair with the king nine, or you just had kings the whole way. Um, are any of those candidates to check on the turn so that if you unleash this fire breathing dragon on the river, you have something to say, aha, I got you.
And what would they be? They'd be the hands that had showdown value.
I'd say,
yeah, Kim, go ahead.
I would say set of sevens, set of nines for sure would go
You would
into
check
that.
those on the turn sometimes.
You can. I mean, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Especially the nines. And the nines are so disguised.
Yeah.
Right. And so that really helps you be able to maybe then check your queens and your jacks, because now you have something that you can fold when the river goes out of control, but you also have something you can call with.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't check queens and jacks though. Me, like personally, like not versus one player. Like we're talking about being the small blind against one player.
Right.
Like I think in this scenario it was multi-way and we squeeze. So that range is going to be different as a squeeze than it's going to be versus one player.
Yeah. And I wasn't trying to equate these situations. The conversation that was coming up was more, and that's why I wanted
position.
I was just trying to simplify it. The conversation was really like, what do we do with these hands that are value but vulnerable, or value but not like 3 streets of value, and we're in this kind of spot.
Let's go through some of the comments here in the YouTube chat, and then I want to talk a little more about sort of like generally this question of like inviting the bluffs, or sort of like this sense of giving up on an earlier street, which is something that we have to do. We have to be very thoughtful about this when we're playing out of position, no matter what our hand is, no matter how many people are in the pot. But let's skip that for now. So yeah, Mike Day talks about, what about check raising the turn, which is an interesting way. We talked about kind of adding some after the check, steps and mechanisms to get some extra chips out of our opponent. Let's come back to that one in a sec. Phil says Andrew and Carlos would have us checking that flop out of position, even after a 3-bet. No, that's King 7-2, like King 7-2 Rainbow. That seems to me like it should be a high frequency C bet, because it's hard for opponents to hit. We have a ton of kings. So I won't doubt Andrew and Carlos, but I'm curious. I'm kind of curious to follow up on that a little bit. We'll see what we can see. Eric Anderson says your betting range is driven by your value hands. So you figure out how many value hands you have, and then find the appropriate number of bluffs for your bet size. Yeah, and that's exactly how you should be thinking about this kind of stuff, starting with your bet size and your value range. But the question I think that Chris is posting here, Eric, is which value hands are we including in that betting range? Because some of those we might be holding into this checking range for protection. Mike says, hold on a second here. Mike says, I would probably bet any kind of combo draws or any mid-strength hands that are vulnerable on the turn, I think is what he's saying here. And so then would we be checking some of our very strong hands to kind of protect our checking range? I'm sure that's also very stack dependent. If we're very deep, we're not going to be able to take any streets off with our very strong hands. But in tournament play, we're not typically going to be that deep for that to be an issue. Eric Anderson says, how long will you have to play before a good player can get a read on you? That's a good question. So let's just take a second and talk about, like, how bad is it to sort of wave the white flag like that? Like, is it that bad? Like, how?
I don't think it's, well, so my thought on this is, because I am thinking about, like a very good elite level player that you'll find yourself playing with sometimes, right? And I don't think it's necessarily they have a read on you. I think they have a read on the population.
Yes.
and they have an understanding of this line is never the nuts, right? This line of 3-bet, C-bet, check, call
Right.
is just, I mean, it's like never the nuts. And so I can get you off of whatever you have.
And speaking of Andrew Brokus, like one of those, you listen to podcasts, you watch videos, you join training sites, you get these thoughts that just stick in your mind. Oh God, did I just push it out of my mind by describing it? Oh, good Lord. I think I did. Chris, what were you just saying?
I was saying this line is never the nuts.
Oh, yes. And Andrew said several years ago, you don't need to know exactly what kind of hand your opponent has. But if you can exclude some hands from their range, that's functionally effective. So he basically describes hands as being either monsters, medium strength hands, or draws/air. And if you can remove one of those three hand types from your opponent's range, that gives you a lot of power. And in this instance that Chris is talking about, he's saying this line removes the nuts from your range. And so your opponent doesn't know if you have a medium strength made hand or air, but they know you don't have the nuts. And that allows them to apply a lot of pressure on the river, really no matter what you do, once you've capped your range in that way. Is that essentially correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So how can we, so that's the real question. If Andrew was here, I would ask, so how do we not wave that white flag? How do we not indicate that we don't have the nuts here without bloating a pot out of position?
Yeah.
And then again, on the river, you have to kind of have the same, if you just give up on the river instead of on the turn, you're kind of still waving that white flag. So that's the hard part, I think. Kim, you unmuted there.
No, I was just wondering, are we talking about opponents that will always bet when we check the turn? Is that the
Right.
specific question we're talking about? Or are we talking about getting to the river and then going check on the turn? Like, which
They're both
one
interesting.
is it? Because they're kind of different, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm the sort of mindless, I'm going to apply aggression when you check is less my concern than the ones who are really aware of the situation and fundamentally understand that we have completely taken off the top portion of our range in most cases.
When we check the turn.
When we check the turn.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the players who, whether they bet the turn or not, they'll probably just overbet shove the river, and now you've got queens on a king high board, and you're like, I don't know what to do.
So
Yeah,
if you knew if this other player was playing with their cards face up and they were just making a play at it, you'd obviously call. So
correct.
If you're that, what are they doing that's making that a bad play?
By doing it with I see, John. You're saying like, is it that they're making these plays with weak ranges and we should just be calling and that's not really a problem?
I mean, are they ever bluffing here with that big thing, or is it always? Are they always? I mean, if they were always bluffing, then it's easy. You just call, right?
Yeah,
and you're done.
Yeah.
So. But you're afraid that they are also doing this sometimes with their value. But the thing is are they really going to be doing it with their value that much unless they really think you're a thinking player?
Mm-hmm.
Because they can't, I mean, unless they have the stone cold nuts, they want to get some value from there. And they've already said you have a capped range, so you can't call. So when would they be doing this for value?
That's a really good point.
It's a good point.
Because we have said, like, the problem is that we've waved the white flag, right? So we're indicating that we don't have strength. So they really shouldn't be trying to value bet at a large sizing. That should be, I mean, again, how balanced are these players? How thoughtful are they? Are they thinking, what do they think we're thinking? It's
Mhm.
but I really like the way John's getting at that, because their perception of our range is as important as our perception of theirs.
So is maybe the adjustment is more like that we have to play this strategy because we do have a condensed range. We can't just always represent the nuts. And we recognize that it caps ourselves, but we sometimes have to call 3x pot shoves with pocket jacks on this board because
Ugh.
because
Yeah.
because we just have to do it sometimes.
Well,
Is that-
I mean, if you can ever read the situation such that they would never be making this play with value, which is a very subjective, hard thing to do.
Sure,
I'm not saying
Right.
that's an easier given, but if you can get there, then the call should be kind of obvious.
Mhm.
I mean, because you're playing for such big stakes, and because the calling without the proper things is so devastating, it's really hard to do. And they don't have to throw a lot of value in there to be getting the proper odds there either, so I don't know, but if you're that confident that they're making a play on you, just call.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
We've got I want to follow up on some really good input here from the YouTube chat. So Phil says, check the flop and go with a delayed C bet on the turn. And he says, and if you're Taylor, then get busted. Nice needle there, Phil. Mike says, check or check raise any top pair or over pairs. So that's how he's got some protecting his range here. And he does chime in later as well to say that asking about the check raise because he thinks he can control the pot size that way and still have the nut. So it's a nice you get a lot of benefit from both sides there because you are kind of discouraging some future bets from your opponent, some bluffs from your opponent because you demonstrate some strength there. Chip Extractor has a bunch of really good points here. It says, the issue with the check call line on turn with obvious bluff catchers that you need to be willing to actually follow through and bluff catch the river, and too many players are not able to follow through. Right, which is exactly what Chris is talking about here.
Right.
And I don't think we always have to call every river just because we call the turn. Like that is one of those like general rules. Like, well, nothing's changed, so if you called on the turn, why don't you call on the river? Like sometimes players do just give up. But I do think that should be a decision that you make on the turn. You should have a sense of like, what are the cards that are going to come on the river? What are the sizes that our opponent's going to use here? And have a sense of whether you're going to call or fold as a bluff catcher, depending on that. Mike and Steve follows up with, good players know that and blow people off their hands on the river. Yes, yeah, exactly. Mike comes in and says, that might be where we have an advantage if we are willing to follow through and take that bluff catching line, because a lot of players aren't. That can be a way of us kind of counter exploiting these aggressive opponents who are used to people overfolding in those spots. As Steve comes back, says, being exploitable in and of itself may not always be a bad thing. If we're willing to re-exploit when they attack what they believe is imbalance, we can put them in tough spots. And this is one of the reasons good players love to play deep. And I really want to jump on that point too, because depth of stack and being in position are the ways that excellent players get to exploit you. They're the ways that they get to express their skill edge, by having more information than you on every street and by having enough behind to put you in very uncomfortable positions with regard to the actual pot size right there. A couple more comments, then we'll jump back into it. Mike Day, I like the bet small on flop, bet big on turn tactic as well. Yeah, anything that, and like we're saying here, when our opponents don't when they don't raise, that also kind of caps their range a bit as well. We can kind of eliminate some of those monsters from their range as well when they don't raise. So when they just call small bets, that gives you the opportunity to take it away on a future street if you're in that kind of bluffing spot. Evil Roy Slade says delayed C bet. And Chip Extractor wants to follow up on this point from Phil earlier. One of the biggest live crushers I know at 2-5 and 5-10 plays a strategy of checking entire range out of position on flops, which is like, I get so that's an exploit, I'm guessing. Like one thing that's nice about it is that you generally are going to be playing. You're going to be playing. You're going to be putting more money in relative to the pot, like pre-flop, while you get to have a skill or a card edge, and you're just not bloating the pot out of position on the flop. And because you're doing it 100% of the time, it's unexploitable. Are there is that I wonder, and Steve, if you're listening, feel free to respond in the YouTube chat. Is that true at very deep stack depths as well? I'm doing great, gang. Doing just real well here. Are they are they checking range out of position in 3-bet pots, like regardless of stack depth? Because it's feels like there's got to be spots where you have a very strong hand, you make a very strong hand, you want to stack your opponent, and you kind of need 3 streets to do that. But I'm kind of curious to see how that goes out here.
Kind of flop dependent in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I mean, I can get behind that, and the more and more I've been studying, the more out of position. I think its default is check, and then you have to justify betting. But I don't know, like
I think that's more in single raised pots too.
yeah,
Yeah,
and betting
yeah.
is so profitable in 3-bet pots. If you can just take it down, you get it's so much, so good.
And I just want to say, when we are facing, it's not always the skilled aggressive opponents that will overbet. Like if you check twice, like if you check turn and check river, there's a lot of people that will overbet.
Yeah, fair.
And with their value and their bluffs
on
the river.
Yeah, I just don't like playing out of position. That's what I'm learning. It's just
well, yeah,
it sucks.
It does.
And honestly, that's
maybe
affected.
We should not 3-bet. So maybe
that's what I was gonna say.
Maybe we should be super polarized and not 3-bet a condensed range when we're out of position.
Yeah, don't tell anyone.
Our super polarized hands, it's easy to get away from the garbage.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think there's something to that. This past year, I started c-betting. I started 3-betting out of the blinds much more judiciously than I had been before because of spots like this, where you end up, now you're playing out of position all hand. You kind of have this range advantage, and so you feel like you're sort of like obligated to continue trying to win the pot. And it makes for some really uncomfortable and awkward situations. We got another comment here from Mike Day. Speaking on what Chip Extractor was saying, can we act like we don't know what we're doing and exploit that way? Oh, hell yeah, brother. 100%. Yeah, you can ask people if hot dogs are sandwiches. You can, get creative with your card protectors and props. You can open limp. You can ask questions. There's all sorts of fun ways to give people the impression that you don't know what you're doing, and then unleash hell. But yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I don't know. I generally don't need to act that I don't know what I'm doing. It just comes out naturally.
So let's talk about the other side of this then. So what are the hands that we're betting? Because now we're saying that we're kind of theoretically coming around to, instead of this being a high frequency c-bet spot, this might actually be a lower frequency flop c-bet spot. Is that so? Are we? And on a board like King 7-2 Rainbow, we're not going to have a lot of like obvious semi-bluffing hands. There's not a lot of drawing hands. There's not a lot of ways for us to. And I guess when we only have so many value hands, we don't need a lot of bluffs and combos in that range as well. But are we betting top set on King 7-2? We're blocking a lot of the hands that we'd like our opponent to have to call. I think we're probably betting. We'd love to be betting trip sevens or a set of sevens or a set of twos. We're probably betting aces, right? We're getting called by ace king. Like ace king and king queen are not that different hands here, honestly.
I mean,
King queen blocks queens.
I would still like to be betting those hands.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. We're not showing up here with 2-7 or king 7. So so we're not going to have a lot of
Set of kings,
value hands.
I might check that. I think I probably would set of kings, check that.
Let's ask the YouTube chat. This is another question, and we'll probably wrap it up shortly here, folks. But on this board, King 7-2 Rainbow, we are the three better. We've been called, we're out of position, and let's say that we're not going to just check everything, but let's say we are going to kind of cut down on our C bets here from the assumptions that we were making at the beginning of the show. What are the hands that we are continuation betting here? So I'll give them a little time to work on that. How much of this is so stacked? Let's just cover a couple bases here. So stack dependent, and if we're in like a tournament and we're shorter stacked, I don't think we need to worry too much about leveraging the entire stack.
Yeah, I was operating on us being deep because the example that we talked that was discussed
Taylor's
was
one, yeah.
fairly deep. I think it was like 70 or 80 big blinds deep or something. So it was fairly deep stacked. It was early in the tournament. One of Kim's arguments for folding, which I thought was a very good one, was that you can't scare them off, and like when you three bet and you're just going to get 5 callers, which he got, so like it was a very deep stack scenario.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess it's just a question of like, what's your threshold for getting it in, right? Like if it's just on a board, like let's say it does go out the way that you said it would. So king 7, deuce, 9, 3, rainbow. Are you getting it in with top there? Like, can you get called by worse for 3 streets? I mean, you can, but can you get called by worse enough to make up for all the times you're also called by better? So my question then is, and if not, what street do we give up? How do we decide? Maybe it's the flop.
Yeah, maybe it, but then like what don't we bet? Yeah, that's the.
So then do we have to just check like Steve and Phil are saying here, do we have to just check 100%? But I guess it's got to be board dependent, right? Because if this was a more wet coordinated board, we'd have to be charging. Do we though? I mean, I have no idea what's going on anymore. What is this game of poker? Are we supposed to be charging our opponents when we're out of position with like these semi-made hands? Like we'd have to bet so big for them to like fold a flush draw in position in a 3-bet pot. You know what I mean? Maybe we're just not taking that line. I guess another thing to think about would be the player that's calling the 3-bet. Like what?
Hang on, why are we trying to make them fold a flush draw? Don't we want them to call?
Yes. That's a good point. Yeah, good point. Sorry, I misspoke. We want them to make a mistake, right? Ultimately is what we want. So we want them to call for like way more than they would have to. But I take your point. We actually, but again, it's harder because we're out of position. I don't like that. We got a comment here from Mike Day. He says he would bet any straight draw, especially open-ended, and any nut flush draw. Yes, on those more wet,
more coordinated
boards for sure. Yeah,
right.
And I think that is.
This is and I think those are the boards where I can get more behind almost checking range or checking a significant portion of our range, unlike a Jack 10 9 2 heart board, and it's in a 3-bet pot. that's a board that I don't have a lot of interest in being out of position and betting out into. No matter
Pretty
what.
good if we have king queen though.
Well,
yeah. So, Chris, are you saying, because I think about it in terms sometimes of, and this is going to sound so straight recreational, but this is the way that I do think about it, which is like poker's not about winning hands, it's about winning chips. And sometimes you just get into a hand where like the bad event has already happened, and you're just not going to win this hand, or you're just not going to win this hand often enough for it to be profitable when compared to all the times you're going to put chips in and not win this hand. So I don't know if that's the same thing as just like, when we say like giving up on the hand, but it does, like, you're in the small blind, you three bet. It's the situation that you've described, Chris. The board comes, 10, 9, 7, two tone or something like that. Is it that sense that like, well, the bad event has already happened and we're just like, we just don't get to win this hand?
I'm a lot less. I mean, if I had, 10, 9, 7, like you said, versus the king 7 deuce one we've just been talking about. And in this case, we had king queen, and the 10, 9, 7 board, I have pocket kings, let's say.
Right.
Like in both cases, I have a pair of kings. In one case, I've got an overpair, or let's say I have aces on the king 7 deuce board. I feel infinitely better about my aces than I do on that 10, 9, 7 board.
Yeah.
Because I've been called in a 3-bet. People have pocket 10s, pocket 9s, pocket 7s. They might have pocket 8s, so they're open-ended. They've got, there's just so many ways in which my overpair is going to be cracked here. So it's a board, I think, that invites us to check more.
Interestingly, again, in some other dynamics, it would be the board where it would say like, yeah, you'd be betting less frequently, but to a higher amount. You'd using a larger
amount.
Size. And I think the real question is like the real question is, when you've got a very strong one pair, your hand is not likely to improve on turns and rivers, but your opponent's hands can a great deal. And so as part of that thing is like, assuming we actually get to the end of this hand, how likely am I actually going to be good? John?
Well, I was just going to say, I wonder if part of the problem is just the terminology we're using. So we're saying we're giving up. Giving up is not considered a positive action.
Right.
If you were to have said, I am not going to throw away money into this pot and give away my money in a negative EV situation, that does become a positive situation. There are spots, particularly if you think about a game like Raz, where it's sitting there on 5th Street and the opponent has your board locked. Even if you draw perfect, you could be drawing dead, depending upon what their base cards are. Even though you have a good hand and there's a good possibility that they don't have that good of a hand. But it turns out there's so much money in that situation. There's so many streets, and you're going to have to put so much money into the pot to make it down that you just got to throw it away. And throwing it away, even if you have the best hand, is the best course of action, because you just don't know. So, maybe that's the case here. I'm not confident that it is, but there are situations in post poker that you just have to do something that you don't like doing, and it's the right thing to do.
And folding the better hand is frequently one of those things, honestly. And like, it hurts, and you want to like know like what they had, and like, you want to close that mental loop, as Eric Jin's always talking about saying, which makes us want to call. But I think that's a good point. And yeah, I think we should. I really like the way you said that, John. We should stop thinking about it as giving up and really just think about it as more getting into showdown mode, right? Because it's not like we're just open folding. We're just declining to continue betting. And so does that mean that we should be betting some, like, so do we have to find some more exotic bluffs then on boards like this? I mean, you know what? That's a whole nother episode. That's a whole nother episode. We got a good comment here from Eric Anderson. He says he's betting sets over pairs and nut backdoor draws, and then check and maybe check raise the rest. Yeah, I like the way he's thinking about the different parts of his range he's going to put in the different buckets there. So this is really, it's a difficult spot. Chris, thank you for bringing this to us, because it's a spot that we encounter a lot playing out of position, and we kind of feel like when we're the pre-flop aggressor, we've got all this extra, juice flowing, even though we're still out of position. I think that can get us in trouble, because we feel this obligation to like continue to try to win the hand. And that really shouldn't be our objective. Like we said earlier, we should really try and just win as many chips as possible in any circumstance. And sometimes you'll get into these situations where the choice is between winning 0 fewer chips and negative fewer chips. And that's, that will remain an option that's available to you. So, yeah. All right. Well, I'm not sure we actually answered your question, Chris. I think we had a kind of a spirited conversation here. And I appreciate that. But yeah, I don't know. Apparently poker's hard, particularly when you're playing out of position. So we usually do this Forums Edition podcast just over Zoom with our premium members, but we're doing this one live over YouTube, and we've had a lot of people contributing. So instead of doing our normal food bank raffle, I think I'm just going to make it. I've got a list here of the people that have submitted some answers and questions to the group. And so I've got Mike, Phil, Eric, Chip Extractor Steve, and Evil Roy Dave. That's 5 people. Chris, do you happen to have a 6-sided die? If you do, I will, if we roll a 6, I will donate $20 to a local food bank here. And if we roll a 1 through 5, that'll be one of our correspondents.
Which one am I trying to avoid to not give it
don't
to Phil?
Roll a 2. Yeah, don't roll a 2 anything.
Okay.
If it's a 2, just say it's a 6. I'd much rather pay $20 than have Phil win anything.
That's called the bamboozling.
The bamboozle. Yeah. What do we got?
Oh my God.
Don't say it's a 2. Is it really?
2.
Oh. All right. Well,
I think Phil
congratulations,
just bamboozled us.
Yeah, I got the old reverse bamboozle. I haven't seen that since the WWE days. In all seriousness, though, congratulations, Phil. You are already a RecPoker premium member, and our first ever hate member. Specifically signed up as a premium member just to have more access to the Wrecking Crew to make fun of us to our faces, which we really appreciate that. Thank you, Phil. And you're just winner after winner here for Phil Razor. Send an email, please, to info@rec.poker, because you're already a premium member. You're going to get some free access to one of our fantastic training partners, which I think you will really enjoy. Info@rec.poker to claim your prize. Thank you, Phil. And it's good to see you too, buddy. Looking forward to getting myself back into the swing of things here and catching up on stuff. All right. Well, folks, this was an absolute blast. Thanks for chipping in your time and your comments on YouTube. I want to thank the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino, because they're a fantastic supporter of the show through their sponsorship over the years. Kim Kilroy, John Somsky, Chris Jones, and even Taylor Maas. Oh, God, do I have to thank Taylor and Phil in the same episode? First one back. Give me a break, guys. All right. Thank you all so much. I had so much fun here, like I always do. Thanks for joining us for another week of the RecPoker Podcast, and we'll catch you at home next week. Take care, everybody.